Recording now. Welcome everybody to Bridging the Cultural Gap with Australia. With me today is my colleague, my dear friend from Downunder, Mr. Brett Parry. He is an Aussie, an expat Aussie living in the US, and I'm joining him as the expat German living in the US. So two blokes outside of their native cultures talking to you about addressing differences with other cultures, finding commonalities in light of differences. That's what we're here to do today. And I couldn't think of somebody better to assist me or actually guide you through this process of how can you make a connection with the culture of Australia, or may I say the cultures. There might be more than one. And we'll find out during this brief webinar. We'll be about 45 to 60 minutes, depending on how much we chat and linger on here, but we've got the room reserved for the full hour, so hang in there with us. As I said, this is recorded. You will receive an access or download link to the recording of this webinar sometime later after this is concluded. And if Brett is super gracious, he might even agree to share the slides, but I'm gonna make Brett that call. So without further ado, let me pass it on to my dear friend Brett. Brett, tell the people who you are. Those of you who are on might not know you yet, and it's about to change. Who are you?
Sure. Well, thanks for the pressure of me having that already up front. I've got to make a decision, an important decision, and of course, we should share, the slides with people. I mean, this is a world of abundance, right? And we need to share everything we've got. So, thank you so much, Christian. Yes, as Christian said, we're good friends, but we're also good colleagues, and we share the passions, the common passion. There's as many on this that are viewing already in the field of intercultural understanding and knowledge and education. And so, yes, I am an Aussie. I am located here in the US. I've been here for 20 years. Do I qualify still as an expat? I'm not quite sure.
What would you call yourself? An immigrant? A bloody foreigner?
Yeah. Depends which way the wind blows. The beauty about me is that also at home, because I'm not married to an American, I'm married to a Polish girl. There is an intercultural dynamic that exists every day in my household. So I get to share these concepts with not only my clients and the people that we interact with and share with each other, but also with my family, and so that's great too.
Now, for those of you who are after this introduction, if you're not quite sure what this guy is, if he's an Aussie, if he's an American, if he's half Polish, none of us actually know really, but rest at ease. I talked to him earlier and he was wearing an Australian rugby shirt. So I think that's all you need to know. This man is still an Aussie. No matter where he lives in the world, this guy is an Aussie. This is a mate. So mate, take it away.
Thank you very much, Christian. Yes, I am. Truly at my heart, I'm an Aussie, deep down, and I still play my favourite sport here in Chicago, which is surprising for most people, which I'll touch on later. So yes, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining, and I hope that we can give some insights into a culture that on the surface, especially when compared with other English-speaking cultures, can seem very, very similar. And but of course, we put this disclaimer in that just like any culture in the world that we reach out to and do business with, or travel to do business with, there are pitfalls. There are some underlying differences that exist. And so we do say that when you're approaching a new culture, foreign culture, that you have to be aware of some of the unfamiliar that you're going to come across. So this is very important. And with a country like Australia, where some of these differences are often intangible, it is a very strong learning or a deep learning experience for those that go unprepared. So what we're going to do today is obviously identify some of the values of my home country, and understand how those values impact the way we communicate, the way we interact, the way we build relationships, the way we do business with each other. We'll also kind of develop some type of understanding of the culture, of the dynamics of the business behaviours, practices that exist in Australia. And also, there are tools that Christian and I and many on this that are on this call at the moment use as part of our professional work to offer insights for the people we work with. And those tools we will cover a little later on, so that we've got some. You're aware of what's available out there and what we use to help people learn. So moving on, of course, the most important thing, and the thing that I've learned in doing this work, is it's always important to I just identify some of the original inhabitants of a land that you inhabit. And in this case, there's no more important place on the planet to do this in Australia. And there is a particular cultural aspect of this with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of Australia, is that if ever you're presenting information about Australia, related to Australia, where there is any possibility at all that a person that is Aboriginal or a Torres Strait Islander from or has that heritage, then it is always good to put this disclaimer up and this warning up, because it is a general belief of a lot of Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginals that to view the images of people that are deceased is a sign of kind of bad omen. And so if you at least give them the heads up, then they have the respectful ability to either leave, disconnect, or continue with that warning in place. But also honouring, we go to the next slide, honouring the original inhabitants of the country, which is a deep and rich and very, very long historical record of inhabiting this country. And I love this picture because this really shows, I think, to me, the connectedness through colouring and just the story in the face of this man who obviously has a lot of pride in his identity and his connection to his culture. And if we go to the next slide, we see there's a vast array of how the Aboriginal culture shows up in Australia, and is of deep fascination to researchers, tourists, obviously. Any visitors and anyone who does business in Australia perhaps might want to kind of learn a little bit, at least a rudimentary insight into some of the historical aspects of how Aboriginals have contributed vastly and importantly to the culture that exists today. Because as I said, it's a very, very long history, rich history. And down here we see published in the journal Science in 2011 was this important study that showed that descendants of the Aboriginal Australians are the descendants of the earliest human dispersal into Eastern Asia. And so therefore this makes them the oldest continuous culture on the face of the planet. So this really is a rich and diverse, certainly diverse culture in and of itself, and one that has to always be honoured and respected in whatever situation you're in dealing with Australians. So
that is something
that's always the important thing. Yeah,
that is something that I was not aware of. So I just learned something new, and thank you for this, Brett.
Sure.
I'm wondering, how has the country of Australia as we know it today, at what point did Australia begin to honor and recognize its original people in the way they are doing it now?
So no doubt the history, like a lot of colonized countries on this planet, the history of the interactions with the Aboriginals and the impact of the European colonization has been pretty, in some cases, quite devastating to their culture. And so there has been always a struggle. And if one learns about the historical influence and the impact, it is not even in a distant history. We're talking about still in the 60s. And even, of course, today, there are still structures in the society that do limit the opportunities for Aboriginal people to be successful. And so that's a kind of continuous work that's always in progress, right? Okay. But it is also very important to recognise. And so while we do recognise the importance and the value of the original inhabitants of the country, we also have to kind of, as Westerners and part of that society, realize the impact, and sometimes devastating impact, of the historical influences on that colonization for the people. But again, they're wonderfully resilient, and there has been strides in making reparation in terms of not just money, but also the reparation of giving back land. In the middle picture here, you see the monolith of Uluru, which is a famous icon in Australia, a place that many people visited. And we used to climb this rock, right? And now that climbing has been put a stop to, because this is a sacred place for the Aboriginal people. These are people that tell stories. They orate story. They don't have a written language. They don't write their language. These are stories that have been passed down for tens of thousands of years through oral tradition. And these are truly sacred spaces. They may be burial spaces. So therefore, it's important that some of these kind of continuing advances still take place. So,
And you
I know
call
we
the
spend a lot of
monolith,
time on that, but it's intentional.
yeah, and you called the monolith by its Aboriginal name. A lot of people outside of Australia have a different name for that geographical feature,
Yeah,
don't
it used
they?
to be called Ayers Rock,
Mhm.
and that was obviously the historical name for the Western people who discovered. But really, yes, now it's been returned to original name Uluru.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So obviously, in the work that we do, just a little bit about this of people that are on this call that don't do this practice. We talk about, and I think this is great, that this is one of Christian's. If you don't get culture, culture will get you. So in a place like Australia, where the dangers are or the differences are intangible, sometimes they're even more of a danger of getting you, right? And now the reputation of Australia of having dangerous animals, that might be one aspect. Yes, maybe the animals will get you, but also the culture can get you too. And this is another great one that Christian, as part of his vernacular, is certainly when the people that we work with are tasked and given the responsibilities of having global responsibilities, then therefore we have to recognize that the people are the ones going global. These are the people you need to support. These are the people you need to give access to resources and learning opportunities so that they can become successful in that culture.
And
So
I
they need
want
to be
to
global ready, as Christian.
I would really want to stress this, because in our work, and I think Brett and I, we have made similar experiences. Often clients come to us because they know we can help their people get ready for the adjustment of moving to another country, to another culture. However, too often we have found that in international corporations, in big companies that have operations around the globe, there is this expectation of, we are a global company, we are an organization with an international presence, hence we are global by definition. That makes us a global company. And in my experience, nothing could be further from the truth. You can be the most parochial organization on the planet, despite the fact that you're spread around the globe, if your people are not behaving culturally savvy or with cultural intelligence as they enter foreign markets. So I think there's a big distinction between the organization being global and the people that work inside the organization, and them being culture and global ready.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's what we call cultural competence, where we're building the competencies on top of the great skills and insights and abilities of the professionals in each of the organizations that we work with, to build this additional skills of global competence, to be aware of not only the influences of the culture they're going to, but also based in the way that they see the world, and they see through their lens, and that is driven by their identity and their source of thinking. So obviously, culture impacts many things, and it has the way that you gain credibility in a culture, the way you build trust, the way you communicate, the way you you build a community. Even friendships can be different in different cultures, and friendships can, in some cultures, can influence success in business, whereas in other cultures it really might not matter. And so knowing about your behavioral preference, certainly as I referenced to before, will benefit you in trying to understand how you are different from the culture you're going to work with or interact with, of course. Yeah. So the gap here, the thing is here is that yeah, we've heard in some political circles and other circles that there is a lot of things, that there is a good degree of what you don't know, you don't know, right? Which is just blindness, and it's natural. We shouldn't be fearful of that. We shouldn't be fearful of admitting that there are just certain things we just don't know, right? And that's a lot of our clients come to us and say, I think I don't know a lot. So, I'm coming from a basis of total ignorance. But we always do find nuggets with our clients who come to us and say, no, there are certain things that you probably know you don't know, right? And you have an inherent understanding that, okay, these are specific things I don't know about, and now I can apply this learning. And then there's also enriching insight into saying, but you actually do know some things. So I mean, I think you'd agree, Christian, that this is the kind of dynamic of a good facilitator, is to be able to dig into this, right?
It is, and let's be honest, the pie chart is completely arbitrary. None of us know really how big the orange or red piece of the pie is. I think this is just to alert all of us that, yeah, we have blind spots that we're not aware of, and it takes somebody outside of your scope of awareness to make you aware of your blind spots. That's why Brett and I are in business, right? That's why we're successful in the way we work with our clients.
Yeah. And so it's no doubt, I don't know whether Christian meant this intentionally, but look, there's a croc. And isn't it a little beauty, eh?
Beautiful animal.
Now, the croc's eyes are above the water, and sometimes you don't know whether this is a croc. I mean, when I'm growing up in Australia, you could often see the head of some kind of reptile, sticking out of the water of a little piece of a dam or something like that. You didn't know whether it was a snake, a lizard, many things. You saw what was on the surface, and because you couldn't see the rest of the body, you didn't really know what you were dealing with. So you had to be at least a little bit careful in approaching it, because you could see what was above the surface. And it's like we're talking about here, the initial things, like I love traveling, and of course a lot of our clients love traveling, and we say, now the reason we travel is to be stimulated, right? We like to go and see places where the food is different and the dress is different, the pace of life is different. These are surface stuff, right? But now doing business in a place, you have to understand some of the influences. And in this case, Australia, there are some really contrasting influences between cultures that on the surface look very much the same. In my case, obviously living in the US, I've learned that explicitly, is that this is a vastly different place to do business than it is in Australia. So some of this is really the way things, the way the country has been developed, the way the colonization has taken place, just the thought origins of the people that have developed there through generations. So,
and I use the croc or the reptile or whatever. I'm not a zoologist. I don't know what type of animal it is. All I know is it has very sharp teeth, and it looks like jaws that could really, really break a couple of bones. And I know from other pictures that this animal is bigger than the excerpt that you see here in the slide. It also has a very powerful tail, which could whack you unconscious. What I'm trying to get at is that what Brett said earlier, if you don't get culture, if you don't recognize the danger that is potentially under the surface, then you might get hurt, or you might lose business, or you might lose trust or a friendship when working across cultures. And too often, um, advice or tips for doing business abroad uh, focus only on the above the surface stuff that are noticeable, that we can pick up with our five senses: seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, the food, the dress, the music, the architecture, the literature, the language, the body language. All of these are noticeable features of culture, the do's and the don'ts that you can memorize, that you can get in your smartphone app or in great tools that are out there. However, understanding or coming to terms with do's and don'ts that don't really do it for you, that don't resonate well with you because they're different from what you're used to, what they're unknown and uncomfortable at first, they all have something that floats them up. So you see what's under the water surface that floats up the do's and don'ts, and what floats it up, what drives these do's and don'ts, is the why of these behaviors, why people do the things the way they do, and that you can't pick up with your five senses immediately. You have to have a deeper understanding, and you have to expose yourself to learning to get a deeper understanding. What are the underlying factors? What are the drivers that float the do's and the don'ts?
Absolutely. Now, I mentioned earlier some tools that we use, and in this case, this is an example of one tool we use. It's called the Globe Smart Assessment Profile. And this is a really rich and deep tool that's been developed with data from many, many years of research, wonderfully expert people in the field of intercultural studies, and also the contributions of over 1 million people that have taken this tool. And so we can, on the surface, identify some of the general influences or preferred working styles of over 96 countries in this tool that give us access. Once we do our own profile, which you can do in this tool, it maps you over these 5 dimensions, but it also gives you the ability to compare the dimensions of the general dimensions of the country you might be interacting with, no matter where it is in the world. And this gives you really kind of good, kind of high level insight into some of the potential gaps that you may have with that culture, and where those gaps exist, how do you bridge them? And also there might be a great rich commonality between you and the culture you're going to, and how do you leverage those similarities to be successful, right? Now, in this particular case, you see Australia. This is one example where Australia and the US, getting particularly to Australia, is you see they're quite close in some of these dimensions. One of them is independence. Now, of course, the importance in this is the debrief. Once you see a culture, 2 cultures come together like that on a tool like this, maybe there's also the ability of some deeper aspects, which we do work through on our program, on our training programs, to kind of debrief this in a deeper way to say, yes, okay, on the surface, this looks like you might have a lot of commonality between Australians and the US. But the independence profile of the US in this particular case, I would argue as an Australian, is more individual type of mindset for Americans, whereas Australians see independence as a collective independence from a separate power, right? Mm-hmm. And so it does depend, and it's very important to have an expert debrief this with you, even though it's very, very rich and able to give you a great deal of information without you having to do that. So that's just one example in a particular case of Australia, but you see some vast differences between Australia and say some Asian cultures, and we've also brought up Brazil, where there seems to be a vast amount of difference. And in this case, you know, I will screen this up in front of clients when they're from one culture and they see themselves, the potential of them being so different, and there's an audible gasp. You know, they're scared to death. They go, how the hell do we ever work together? Right. Now, being a glass half full kind of Aussie that I am, I might say that this is a great opportunity, right? This is fantastic. We have all this opportunity to work together, and your great tendency to be direct is going to really be well balanced by the tendency of somebody to be more indirect. And so this is where these great profiles come into play in teaching and learning and developing the skills of professionals, global professionals.
Now, how do you, let's assume we're looking at like the countries that you put on this comparison. Let's look at India, Japan, and China, Asian cultures that are among the top business partners or trading partners for Australia, and also show, at least according to the Globe Smart profiles, are showing some vast behavioral differences. So what would be your advice to people from Australia, no, from people to people from India or from Japan, how can they bridge those gaps? Well, what are some techniques that would help them to overcome some of those glaring differences?
Well, one thing I didn't mention, of course, is this is a continuum. This is not measuring right or wrong. It's always important to remember that. So there is valid proof that this style, whether you're on the right-hand side of this continuum or the left-hand side, can be just as valid as each other, right? And again, going back to my point, is that if you're a professional from an Asian culture working in Australia, just to be aware, just to have a heads up and say your Australian colleagues are going to be more effusive, more direct, more explicit in their communication, but somewhat, say, sarcastic. We'll get into the point of humor and sarcasm later. Maybe in contrast to the Asian cultures, maybe a little bit more emotive and emotional, right? Mm-hmm. And so to be prepared for that, and not, you're certainly not going to reinvent yourself and change to be that style, but maybe learn to style switch. And the opportunity is, of course, if you're a professional and you're a leader from an Asian culture going to Australia, then you have the opportunity to share a tool like this with your colleagues, so that it's important for them to identify some of their influences and how that may contrast with you, so that you can come together in a common understanding. One example would be the communication, is where an Australian is often responding very quickly, because usually through that myopic framework of monolingualism, right? Of just kind of listening to respond, listening to give an answer. Whereas the more reflective and thoughtful and insightful style of an Asian, Japanese person or a Chinese person can sometimes be overwashed by that strength of that stronger type of more direct communication style. So if an Australian is aware of that, and we've worked to train many to do this, is that there is a reason why you have two ears and one mouth. And the idea is that you use the two ears, listen doubly with Asian people and speak once. So that's just one easy tool, right? But there are many different aspects of this that we debrief people and try and bridge those gaps. Yeah.
Now we do have a little bit of a goodie or a surprise for our participants. Do we want to share that with them now, or do we want them to wait until the end till we share that with them around GlobeSmart?
No, let's share it now, right? I mean, okay. if you, I'm just eager to give goodies away. Well, this is
and that you win a car, and you get a car, and
yes,
you win a car.
Everybody gets a car.
Commodore. Okay.
So this GlobeSmart profile is free for everybody who goes and does their own profile. So you can go to globesmart.com and do that. But for those that are participating here, we have we're going to be sending out a coupon to have the full access to the comparisons of the full 96 countries, and also the dynamically produced and advice that goes along with it through the insights of the country culture guides that we have in there as well, so that you can explore and play around with it and really get the full benefit of the full scope of the tool, and decide whether it's something, if you're a practitioner like us, that you want to use with your clients, or that you're a potential client with or somebody that's responsible for a global team, or somebody that's interacting, whether you might want to use it for your own organization. So yes, that is it. I mean, is the rest going to be a kind of I don't know. Are we all downhill from here? Have I just kind of given up everything? Maybe
no,
not. Let's go forward. Let's go forward.
I don't think you did. And since we're not, this is not a GlobeSmart webinar. We're not diving deeply into this. I'm just going to preempt this, and even though we haven't put it on the calendar yet, there will be a separate webinar we'll put on the calendar soon to just highlight to you how GlobeSmart works, and for those of you in the field who are contemplating whether they want to use another tool as a cross-cultural practitioner, or if you're in human resources or talent development or organizational development, and you think this is something your organization could really utilize for the organizational growth and the development of your global leaders, then our GlobeSmart specific webinar will shed some more light on it, and we can dive deeper into this. And outside of that, Brett and I are always here to answer any questions around that. So if you want to have an offline conversation, we're happy to having that. All right. So enough with GlobeSmart for now. And no, Brett, you didn't spill all the beans just yet. So
great.
Because we don't only have beans to spill, we have fruits to spill too.
We have fruits to spill, yes. So I wanted to leave this in. This is just a fun metaphor that we often use in our field. The people that are on this call that are used to this is always fun for us to measure cultures through the sense of these fruits. The coconut, meaning that you might find the people a little bit brusque, a little bit humorless when you first meet them, a little unfriendly, maybe a little kind of rude. That's just some of the words. I don't know what to say. That's some of the words that come out, right? And I know we've got a German here, so I've got to be sensitive about this. But I'm married to a Polish girl, and she's a bit like that too. Now, of course, we have the peaches that are very, very sweet on the outside. They're very open and friendly on the outside, but there may be a center core of privacy that exists in the culture that people don't tend to kind of build or connect deeply, or maybe they're put off by personal questions that may come from a person from another culture where that is certainly acceptable and on the table. And then there is that kind of a third concept of the fuzzy coconut, which I would argue is a little bit like Aussies, where there's a softness and there's a bit of an open kind of approach to with Aussies. But there is this multi-layer that you kind of have to dig through a little bit, because when we are presented with people that are potential friends and colleagues and connections, we're going to make you work for it. We're not going to just kind of give it up like the one little crack through the shell. It's going to be maybe a little bit of a harder process, right? So that's just one concept which is common.
And while we're in the fruit store, ask me about the pineapple. We'll include the pineapple next time. That might be a fun one to add to. All right, but
nice.
Not today. Stay tuned.
Not today. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. And so this is all to kind of establish the fact that all the influences, our values and beliefs that we're taught as people and as a culture, and our collective training, that subconscious training that comes in, really makes us see the world in a certain way. In this particular case, a great illustration of that is that this poor guy here has nothing to see but hit the horn in the middle. So obviously he's including it in his paintings. So this is a very good expression of this, certainly.
Yeah, that's me. Okay.
That's you. So the rest of the world might see a map like this, and this is probably, as we grew up, you probably saw many maps like this. This depicts the average kind of viewpoint of the world. But just as we saw on the previous slide, I might argue that this is the correct way, because us Aussies might see the world. Who said that we're down under anyway? Who made that up? Why isn't this just as valid, with Australia at the top, in the middle, the most important, of course? Well, of course, this is a fun map to kind of look at, but it does change your perspective. It shows how we can kind of change our perspective of the world with one quick change of a map, right?
And so jokes aside, there is. I've seen other world maps, and I'm not a cartographer. There is a German living in Austria who's a cartographer. If you're not following him on social media, then you should start doing that now. Simon Küstenmacher is his name, or Simon Küstenmacher. I don't know how to pronounce his name in English.
Let's make sure we include him in the notes that we send out.
Yeah, let me put it in the chat box. Simon Küstenmacher. And he's a cartographer and very active on social media. and he throws out these cartographic nuggets day by day. And I've seen him post some new um, approximation of land masses in proportion to each other on the globe. And apparently, most of our maps have been a little bit, let's say, Euro biased, or been drawn with a Western bias, meaning that the shape and size of the African continent in relation to Europe or the Northern Hemisphere is totally out of whack, and which gives those of us who hail from a European Western context, and to a certain degree that includes Australia and New Zealand, that gives us a sense of importance, because our land masses are great, right? They're bigger than others, or in proportion to each other. If we were to use more geographically accurate representations, we would see that Europe is in fact a dwarf, and that the African continent is much bigger than it is displayed here on this map. So I think it's the Mercosur or Mercursia. I don't know. Simon Kustma, follow him, and you'll get some really great insights on how our perspective on who we are on this planet might change a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to throw this, there's a little bit of audience participation here, which I always like as a singer. I like to get some feedback. If I was to just ask you, if we were to, I say to my participants, if we were to bump into each other in a coffee shop, and I said, what is your perception of country X? In this particular case, what words come to mind for people when you think about Aussies or Australia in general? What just type up in the chat box and see what kind of words come to mind.
Use your chat box, and if you don't know where to locate that, hover your mouse over. There they pop in. Holy crap! Okay, the first one here is coming from Jennifer Gallo. Criminals. Annette
That's not the first time I've been told that.
Annette van der Velds, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, says laid back and barbecue. Lucy Fogarty says settler country. And Elizabeth Pacheco says relaxed people. And Jason Perry, maybe relation to you, Brett? I don't know. Jason Perry says larrikin.
Never heard of the guy.
Never heard. So Jason Perry says larrikin. You will have to decipher that for us. Irreverent, says Lucy. And Jennifer specifies she was only joking about the criminals, that she used to work on a cruise ship and they were always the best guests.
Right.
Wendy Alexander says wine country, and she loves wine. Elizabeth Pacheco says sports are your religion. And Lucy reminds us of the tall poppy syndrome. There's a lot to unpack here, Brett. So let's start with a criminal. So I heard the joke that a Brit is entering Australia at the airport and is being asked by the customs officer if they had a criminal record, and the Brit says, I wasn't aware that you still need one to get in here. So
exactly.
So what's it with the criminans? Can you decipher that for us?
That is the origin of the colonization of the country, obviously, and so the first European settlement that was established there was really as a jail. It was a place to send people that did bad things, and not necessarily real bad things. I mean, just for the crime of stealing a loaf of bread in the bad and dark times of old London and Ireland. These were relatively minor crimes that you could be convicted of and sent off to what they call transportation, and that was to go to Australia. And of course, they didn't know at that point that we were getting, our ancestors were getting the better deal. I mean, look at the place. I mean, have you ever been to England in the middle of winter? now for us, obviously, so when the first wave of, let's call them immigrants, colonization took place, it was through the establishment of penal colonies to be a place of punishment. When people finished that punishment, they were given oftentimes the choice to stay and help maintain or develop or manage the colonies, or they were given the choice to go back. A lot of people stayed because the trip was pretty brutal. We're not talking like, people are wondering about this 19-hour flight, right, from Australia to London, and they're complaining about that. This was months at sea in horrific, conditions. So, brother, I'm not putting up with that. I'm not doing that. I'm staying where I am. I'm trying to make the best I can. So that really informed that. So that's where that comes from. There's a wonderful wine, by the way, getting onto the wine, called 19 Crimes. It is becoming very popular here in the US. And it's an unusual name, and it's an Australian wine, but most people say, what is that? And that is the 19 crimes that people were, the set of 19 crimes that people could be transported for back in the old days, right? So that was
I hope there are 19 different bottles that we all have to drink in order to get behind them. Okay.
Well, I think they're kind of expanding the range of, as always, anything's better than Yellowtail. Don't tell anybody. But that's
okay. This was not an endorsement, but you may have come across this in your local grocery store in North America, and yes, that's what Australians try to get rid of. So stay away from it. Right. So
it's the same concept of Foster's beer, right? Nobody drinks Foster's in Australia, but that's fine. Everybody else outside of the country can drink it. That's fine. And so all of the other great things, the things about sport, the laid back, these are common type of things that we hear from people, whether they've been to Australia or not, right?
Well, when I think of Australia, I think of sports first. I think that's the first thing I think of as a European is I think of what a great swimming nation, some of the best swimmers on the planet. I think of rugby. I think of staunchly independent in a different way. I have yet to understand the intricacies of how Australians view their independence as compared to the United States, and you hinted at it. Sure. I think all the Australians that I've met have this. I think they have to me, it appears to be very similar to the US, without the sense of exceptionalism that the US has about themselves. So I've never seen Aussies thinking of themselves as the great experiment and as being exceptional as a country or as a people. So I think that closes the loop to the tall poppy syndrome, if you want to shed some light on that.
That is reference to that. Yes, absolutely.
So what is the tall poppy syndrome for those of us who have yet to experience it?
So it's a general sense that Australians, because we have this a little bit more of a collective understanding about what is good for the common man and woman in the street, is that once people start to be seen to be putting themselves above the pack, there is an active, almost intentional action of bringing those people down, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit later on. There's actually, it's referred, I've kind of got this a little later on where I'll refer to this, but it basically is saying if you get too big for your boots, we're going to untie them for you or tie them together so you can trip over, right?
All right.
That's kind of the concept of the tall poppy syndrome. And
is it a sort of envy of those who succeed? Do we not?
No.
That's not what it is, right?
That's not. It's not an envy. It's not an envy thing, and that's a common misconception. Mm-hmm. Is that, are you jealous of the person? No, it's not a jealousy. It's a tendency to just say, you're good, great, fantastic, that's fine, but you didn't get to where you are without the support of the people that made you successful. So we just kind of, in a friendly way, remind people gently of that. Mm-hmm. That's not to say I'm jealous of you. I'm going to tear you down. That's not what it's about. In many cases, I mean, some cases it might be for some people, but in this case, in general, culturally, no, that's not what's going on for Australians.
Right. Yeah. No, but just wanted to clarify that. All right.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good point.
Thank you, everybody, for weighing in. And I forgot to mention it out loud. Bonnie Boone said Australians she sees them as very independent and self-reliant. I think that's a good keyword here, self-reliant. Yeah. That is
absolutely
something that I think you would confirm, right?
we'll put a framework around that a little bit later, and as
Right.
to what some of the influences of that. So the history of Australia is obviously a nation of immigrants, and through that colonisation process, that certainly is the case. So through many different iterations of immigration waves, we've had immigration from Europe originally, and then obviously after that, more from the Middle East. Wonderful traditions of Middle Easterns, especially Lebanese. I mean, when we talk about food and their influence and the importance of the influence on the community there, it's wonderful. And then a little later on, of course, in our proximity to Asia, no surprise that we have a lot of great Asian immigration as well. And all have contributed to this wonderful country, and still do so today. Obviously, even though that it is a land of immigrants, the original non-rhotic version of the English language became prevalent. And so this is that is the lingua franca of the country. Majority Christian, absolutely, but obviously imbued with a wonderful, diverse faith traditions of all different traditions. Obviously coming from those immigration waves, and the assertion of freedom, and independence from an overpowering or a separate power that may have an influence of us. Agrarian to industrialization, obviously the land, the country with its vast resources as far as land is concerned, lent itself to more agrarian and farming activities, and that's where the early success of the country came about. But then we went quickly into industrialization, just like the rest of the world. We followed the rest of the world in that. We are urban-centered population, and we'll get on to, we'll touch a little bit on the population in a minute. But we are certainly urban, and to the extent that my home city of Sydney, we're talking almost just under a quarter of the population in one city, right? Quarter of the population of the country in one city. And the second city, Melbourne, there's probably close to that too. So we're talking almost a half, maybe at least a third, in two major metropolitan areas of the whole population of the country, which is very important to remember. And then, of course, we have independence, democracy, informality. Some of your answers to that question before, certainly the laid-back style, competitiveness, and again, I've put an asterisk here to say perhaps not as forthright in individual competitiveness, but group competitiveness, the pride in the group, the pride of a larger group having, even for individually successful people, like you mentioned, swimmers and things like this, which this is an individual sport where people compete, but there is a collective ownership in an Australian soul of the success of those people that go forward. And this is what I love about Aussies and the way Aussies follow their sport. Very pioneering, and of course we get back to this kind of idea of freedom as well. So next one. And so this is a kind of a very impactful image to say if you look at the size of the continental US, that Australia is pretty close to the same landmass size, and yet look at the difference in population, right? And this is really through the sense of, obviously there's a little bit more of arable land to be able to have access to in the continent, on this part of the continent, right? Where there's farming, there's rich farmland, and this is kind of this was developed and it allowed for a wonderful expansion of population and massive population to become successful. In Australia, we just have a lot of desert, man. It's just it's uninhabitable, unforgiving, brutal topography. And so therefore it just didn't really lend itself to a vast amount of expansion with the support of a very rich environment to sustain it. So that's why we've kind of always struggled, to be a big nation of population. In the 50s, we had this active, we were paying people to come to the country. Some of the politicians said we have to populate or perish, right? If we do not populate this country, we will not survive. Birth rates were down. We weren't replacing the people that were dying. So this became a real issue for the early development of the culture. So.
And how has that shifted in, let's say, in the last 30 years? I'm looking at the period since the Cold War ended, and the movement of people from formerly controlled parts of the world in terms of movement of people. Has that changed the demographics in Australia significantly?
The demographics has always been dynamic as far as its influence of immigration. So some of it has been through refugee absorption of refugees, say from closer places like Vietnam after the Vietnam War, or during the Vietnam War, right? So we became a place where this was a popular destination, or it was a popular destination for refugees from that part of the world. We also absorbed a lot of refugees from other places that were experiencing those type of conflicts in Europe, and we also did it. We also have that from Africa. You know, the influence of some wonderful influences of the Somali refugees being settled there, right? And so yeah, it's kind of always dynamically changing, and more recently the Asian influence or immigration that have come and brought with them, not through the sense of refugee status, but basically just an interest in establishing, you know, themselves in a country like Australia. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. And so this picture shows basically, you know, the early origins of my hometown, Sydney. This depicts a picture of Botany Bay and the ships in the harbour, the original colonies being established by the British, sending convicts with a small group of people to oversee them, to basically, yes, be a penal colony, right? So if we go to the next one. Somebody mentioned, and of course it is that guy Jason, the larrikin sense of humour. I didn't reach out to him and tell him to say that, by the way. It just works out that he pointed it out. So the larrikin is a kind of a, you know, a sarcastic type of mischievous type of character that brings with them a certain sense of cheerfulness and certainly a sense of humour that comes along with it. Now, I've put the heading over here, the qualities of a digger. A digger is kind of defined as, in an Australian sense, as somebody who is constantly maybe battling the elements. Somebody who, and the word digger came out of the armed forces, and some of the early participation of Australian soldiers and New Zealand soldiers too, that participated in the First World War and even wars before that, that got this reputation of being very tough, very dogged, and just never really saying that, and never quitting, right? This constant resourcefulness that comes with this mindset that, yes, life is always tough, but we can be resourceful, we can maintain it. And the spirit of mateship. Now I go back to the original, the settlement and colonies of Australia. So you just look at the US and Australia as two diametrically opposed, but on the surface, very similar cultures. Here, as I mentioned before, when early colonists came to this country, they were faced with a lot of abundance. There was, in general, places where they could grow crops, raise animals, and it made for this ability to spread and go across this land with a great deal of speed. And literally at the end of the rainbow, obviously in California, there was a pot of gold, right? So that literally existed. Now, in Australia's case, when the first settlers got there, there was rock, there was sandstone, right? It's a tough place to grow any crops on sandstone. So the original colonies were really based on, even the place, the most historic place in my hometown is called The Rocks, because it's literally built on sandstone. It's built on rocks. And they're starting to do archaeological digs into some of these early settlements, and it's really interesting. But it really has kind of imbued the Australian spirit with this sense of, this is a tough place to conquer. There are animals that are going to kill you. There is wild weather. There is kind of challenging topography to deal with. So therefore, that spirit of mateship imbued this sense of independence, yes, but the ability to use that, we're going to be successful as an independent group and we're going to conquer this land. We need our mates around us. Otherwise, we just can't strike out on our own and make it in this very inhospitable place. I pointed out courage here, Anzac spirit, Australian New Zealand Army Corps. And I recommend anybody to read up some of the history. Anybody who's seen the film Gallipoli will understand that of some of the history of this. If not, it's interesting to kind of learn a little bit about the history of the Anzacs and their role in World War One, where this is where Australians kind of in general got their sense of identity and also their external reputation as being a very resourceful, dogged, never say die type of mentality, right? And of course, we have the notion of a fair go. Everybody gets a fair shake. We had a very core, very egalitarian culture. So we have this really at the depth of our soul. And then a kind of a pretty healthy distrust of authority, right? Which can play out in terms of if some people come from a culture where individual excellence and the ability to make yourself more important and celebrate your own importance, right? A tall poppy syndrome. We kind of tend to really have a visceral response to that through the lens of saying, we're a little bit suspect. It's a little bit suspect, mate, you know, like this is a bit over the top. So now I mentioned before the influence of this great agricultural foundation. There was a saying that Australia was built on the back of the sheep. And it was a very perfect place to grow what you can see here is very good merino wool through what is known as one of the best and finest wools on the face of the planet. But also cattle, beef is a wonderful export of ours, and also wheat with vast tracts of land where some of these crops really thrive. And then later on, when some of the natural resources and the industrial age came along, it's been really influenced by a great deal of resources. We have the largest deposits of uranium are in Australia. So our country is open as a marketplace. We have huge coal reserves. We have oil reserves. Two of the largest oil companies in the world are Australian. So this really is a resource land, and it has influenced and helped in the later years some of the prosperity that's taken place. Now, somebody mentioned about this before, but I'm going to read this quickly. And if it makes sense to anybody and you can tell me what it is, I want you to put it in the chat box, unless you're an Aussie, which you will know. There are two sides, one out in the field and one in. Each man in the side that's in goes out. When he's out, he comes in, and the next man goes in until he's out. When they're all out, the side that comes in and the side that goes in is out and tries to get out those coming in. Sometimes you get men still in and not out. When both sides have been in and out, including the not outs, the winner is declared. That, of course, if there is one. Anybody take a guess at what this is describing?
Well, I know it, and I will not say because this makes no sense whatsoever.
It makes complete sense.
Of course it does. Bonnie Boone says soccer. I dare you, Bonnie. How no. But Annette van der Annette van der Veld and Lucy Fogarty take a guess at cricket. What is that?
Wonderful.
Cricket?
Well,
isn't that an insect that jumps? No.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's go to the next slide.
All right.
Great guesses. Yes, that's right. This is cricket. And of course, I mentioned that I play my favorite sport, and this is my favorite sport. So cricket, that's what it does. But you can see where if we talk about kind of contextual understanding between cultures, to read that paragraph to an Australian makes complete sense. Also make complete sense to a New Zealander and an English person. But the countries that don't play the sport, right? That's kind of inaccessible. right? It's like, this is gibberish. What does this even mean? And of course, this is a great lesson in the context of whatever is going on between cultures. So obviously, if we go to the next one, we see that, yes, it's true, as somebody identified before, sport is kind of a religion to us Aussies. There is a joke, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, which is an iconic stadium and a place to play all kinds of different sports. There is a saying going around, and it probably still is valid, that you would get 100,000 people at the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, to watch two flies crawl up a wall, right? And and there'll be betting on it, and there'll be and each side of it will take a side, and they will be rabidly supporting their fly going up the wall. But this is what really imbues our kind of culture. So and what is most common in Australia are team sports. At very young ages, outside of the structures of the schooling system, like it might exist here in the US, there are very, very active clubs that allow both young and old people to participate in team sports very actively. And so everybody seems to participate. And so it's a great place to go and play sport, watch sport, but also, if you're building relationships with potential colleagues in Australia, at least showing some curiosity or the ability or the intention to learn and appreciate the sport is a great way to build relationships with Aussies, right? This is a really good kind of entrance doorway into building these relationships. So there are many, and there's a sport for everybody in Australia. So if you don't like football, and in this case, I'm referring to soccer, then there's another football and probably another football that you would like to play, right? Or participate in. So that's great. So next one. Now, of course, the laid back. Somebody said laid back, of course. Now, if we'd have got to the moon first, and who said we didn't, of course, but if we'd have got to the moon first, would we have put a flag in the ground? Would we have live streamed it back to the planet? Well, maybe there's an argument that no, we would have actually gone, yeah, this is a good time to crack a beer. This is a good time to go and sit back and go, hey, this is pretty cool, right? This is like being at the beach. So this is just a fun way to kind of put into context some of the laid back attitudes of the Aussies. And then we get to communication. And I have this quote that the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's even taken place. So we often think that we understand or can have access to communication styles of the people we deal with internationally, but oftentimes that leaves gaps. And we go to the next one. For Aussies, yeah, nah, and oh yeah, nah, for sure, right? So I would put these three up, and and you might hear Australians say these things, and of course these seem to not make sense. So yeah, nah, yeah is yes, yeah, nah is no, and yeah, nah, for sure is absolutely, right, for sure. So,
oh, it's not just the sequence of the words; it's also how the intonation goes up or down towards the end of the phrase. Got it.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's this kind of reflective. There's another aspect of what some Australians will use, this kind of like they'll say, how are you? And an Aussie will go, not bad. Or they might go, yeah, not good. Yeah, it wasn't not the best. So there is an observation that Aussies will often answer with a negative, but it'll mean a positive. Yeah, not bad means bloody great. We don't use some of the more effusive hyperbole that might be in some cultures where everything is awesome, right?
Yeah, excellent. Splendid.
Yeah, excellent.
Marvelous.
It's just, yeah, not bad.
Not bad.
Now, of course, when it comes to saving face, Aussies really don't care about how they see themselves. We are probably pretty famous on the face of the planet of being laid back and poking a bit of fun. So when it comes to saving face, like exists in a lot of other cultures, again, if you're coming from an Asian context where a consideration of the way that somebody is seen and perceived by their colleagues and the public face is very important and has to be maintained. In the Chinese, that's why they have this mianzi, and also this sense that you have to maintain your face in front of the colleagues and especially your boss. And you also give face to people. This is a transaction, right? That you give honor, you give respect to people. Us Aussies, this is kind of a little bit off the table. We don't mind poking fun at ourselves. All right. So we look at ourselves and we laugh most heartedly at ourselves. And this can be a little bit disconcerting for people that don't come from cultures that are comfortable doing that. Be aware we will also laugh at you, and we would do it heartily. And I would guarantee that the more you got made fun of, the more that you were on the receiving end of sarcasm, the more these people like you. Now, that might seem a bit strange, but that's just kind of the way we are, right? And of course, me, sarcastic, never. That would never happen, right? So what I do tell people is that, of course not. And what I tell people in the US, of course, I switched off my sarcasm years ago because this is the slight difference. Again, if you're a sarcastic person like me and you tell a lot of jokes, if you do crack one of these jokes or be sarcastic in a setting, say in general with a lot of US Americans, because this is a more literal communication use of style use of English, that if I do say something sarcastic, I get a lot of like, oh, what does that mean? There's this kind of sense that is this a joke? Now, even some Latin Americans have said, yeah, now sometimes I come across that too, because they can be sarcastic too and might bring a little bit of humor into the space. And therefore they might not be seen as taking things as seriously as their counterparts want them to. Does that mean they don't get the gravity of the situation or the importance of the task that needs to be done? No, Aussies do. I mean, you will not, you will find that Aussies will go to battle. They will go to work with you and for you. But they have to have this have to take the edge off the tension with a little bit of humor, and just to kind of build that relationship, build that depth of relationship with you that, hey, come on, at the end of the day, this is not all really that important. But I know it's important, so I'm going to work hard anyway. Yep. And then some of these concepts that another kind of tool, this is one of Erin Meyer's concepts, and you can see on this, as far as when it comes to egalitarianism and top-down type of mentality, Australia and the US are pretty much in the same quadrant. But again, just like Globe Smart, there are some nuances where you can see that maybe the Aussies are a little bit more egalitarian to a T. This laid-back sense that you pull your pants on the same as me, buddy. I don't really care where you're from. If you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. We're going to treat you and see you as a person and receive you, interact with you on a pretty open and what we call universalistic way. Yeah.
Well, and
I want to pass this back over to Christian. That's kind of what I've kind of given you there is a bit of a synopsis of some kind of general cultural contrasts, commonalities, ideas about what makes Aussies tick. But built onto the top of the tools that we use, this is another great tool that I'm going to pass this back to Christian and thank everybody for your attention. And Christian, take it away. Tell us about that.
Thank you, mate, for your self-deprecating analysis. I love that. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to interact with Brett or another Australian yet, I found that in North America, the sarcasm is something that I don't want to say it's underdeveloped. I think it fell to the wayside from original British communication styles because of the many different communication styles brought into North America through immigration, which was early on much more diverse than it was initially in Australia. The diversity in Australia happened a little bit later on, and I believe that helped the rather British sarcastic communication style to survive a little longer. In the US, sarcasm often falls flat, and I've bombed many times with my attempts of being funny. It may just be me, right? So as this slide
Oh,
says,
hang on. What this? You always tell me that you take your humor very seriously.
yeah, that is a myth. Now there's this I think it's important to making that distinction, that there is culture that shapes our behavior, but then there's also our personality. So I
Right.
might be a terrible comedian, even though I consider myself to be hilarious. And if I'm the only one laughing, then that kind of limits my money making abilities as a comedian. So there's culture as one aspect of a driver for behavior, and then there's
Can I interrupt there? So just quickly, Christian, because I
yeah.
forgot to say something. You made a really good point. This is where a lot of people, I think the challenge of my countrymen, and in general, because I've worked with a lot of Aussies, we are kind of blind to the kind of trust we put in our own hilarity. So I can say it that way. So, Aussies come to a place like America and think, well, everybody loves Aussies, right?
Yeah.
Everybody loves Aussies. So therefore, if I can just go, few g'day mates, and here you go, mate, that kind of stuff, then these people are going to open up their checkbooks and it's going to be gravy, right? Big population, big market. But the challenge for Australians is that when it gets down to brass tacks for Americans, they don't care where you're from. It is business and it is transactional, and you need to be very serious if you're an
Right.
Australian coming here and doing business. And so I just wanted to kind of build on that point you were talking about. So
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's a valid point. It's how much do we allow ourselves to be comedic and think we can lighten the room with our um, culturally specific type of appearance. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, my native culture, Germany, is not necessarily known for its humor in business situations. So our culture often is perceived as being too rigid, too inflexible, and completely humorless, and very gray and dull. But striving for perfection and professionalism and adhering to the rules and blah blah. I could run down a litany of stereotypes around here. So the ability to dial that up and down is what will make you successful in a cross-cultural context. So I know we're running terribly over, and thank you for all of you who are staying on here. And this just tells us that you're interested in this. This is good. So we're tying this up here. So we showed you GlobeSmart as a cultural comparison tool. I often use it in connection with a personality assessment. We like Bank. There's others out there, and I'm not going to discredit their validity. I like Bank, or our organization likes to work with Bank, because it quickly helps us recognize decision-making patterns in different personalities. And Bank is an acronym for Blueprint, Action, Nurturing, and Knowledge. And yes, we will have a separate webinar on how that works. So I'm not going to dive too much into that. Just know that there's another layer of unpeeling this onion of human behavior. Now, what I want to close with tonight is, or this morning, wherever in the world you are, that if you are indeed in a situation where either you or your clients or your organization that you're working for is sending people into other countries overseas, it might just be the neighboring country, it might be the other end of the globe, you're putting a huge investment in your talent, in your employees. And expatriate assignments are costly. They are still somewhat necessary. And once this corona craziness ebbs down a little bit, which we all hope it will soon, then we will see much more movement around that again. And it is a huge investment in your talent. And these are not arbitrary numbers. These are compiled numbers from years of data that I've collected. So these are approximations and not exact numbers. I've had people ask me before, how did you get those numbers? And I could give you the footnotes, but suffice it to say that on a 3-year expatriate assignment, you're looking at $1 to $2 million US in talent investment that you're, as an employer, you're putting at risk. And you see the breakdown of that cost pie here. And if you're looking at your risk mitigation, at your insurance policy on saving that pie, on saving that investment, which is cultural training coaching, which is language instruction if you're entering a foreign language market, and which is also destination services, so logistical support for your expatriate overseas. These are fractions of the overall cost mix that you're encountering with an expatriate assignment. So if you're going to be cheap at this tiny slice of the pie and you're willing to risk the entire pie over your cheapness with a little slice, go ahead and do that. Tissues are on us. But if you are, if you want to mitigate that risk, if you're consciously aware of how this is important to your organization and to the success of your foreign assignees or your foreign employed expatriates, then this is a no-brainer, right? We put together a little bit of a formula for global growth. I'm a fan of IceQ. I made this up, and it's not copyrighted yet. Just know that I will copyright it, so don't steal it without asking me. IceQ is the combination of IQ, which is your subject matter expertise, your brain power, your factual knowledge in your specific industry. CQ is cultural intelligence, the competency to quickly navigate between cultural phenomena and behavioral preferences. And EQ is your emotional intelligence, your ability to relate to others despite your emotional disconnect at that point at first. So the combination of IQ, CQ, EQ equals IceQ, which we symbolize this with a combination of globe, mind, and heart. This is not a soft skill, as some people often refer to. This is one of the hard factors for global success, for global growth, because if you look at this equation, if your IceQ is low or non-existent, then your growth curve will be bloop, and it will be the way we want the corona curve to be, but you want your global curve to go this way. So make sure that the numbers above the line are as big as they possibly can. So with that being said, I want to thank you, Brett, for staying on for so long and sharing your knowledge and your experience about your home culture. It was very enlightening. It was awesome to hear you talk about your native world. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about it that way. So it was fascinating for me as well. I learned a lot. Those of you who are on, this is how you get in touch with both of us or either of us. There will be the recording for you made available, and those of you who are watching the recording, this is how you get in touch. These are phone numbers in the US, and there's a way to bypass the international calling. We'll figure something out. We'll send you details on how to get in touch with us via the phone that has nothing to do with the US phone numbers. So with that, there is Jacqueline, who says, thank you very much. Lucy said, great insight into Australian culture. Elizabeth said, very instructive. Thank you so much. And Wendy raised her hand. So let's see what we can do about this. Wendy is raising her hand, and let me allow Wendy to talk. Wendy, you got the mic. Well, let me unmute you. Wendy, I think you have to unmute yourself real quick, because I'm doing it on my end, and that's all I can do. So if you find your unmute button, Wendy, you have the mic for a second.
Hi.
Hey, Wendy.
I apologize. I did it by accident, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. This was just amazing.
Well,
amazing.
Thank you.
And I truly appreciate you all sharing.
Well, thank you, Wendy, for being on. Thank you for sharing your feedback. I'm going to mute you back. We're going to close this out. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brett, for being on. And whoever Jason Parry is, I suspect that he's related to you. He says booty mate, whatever that means. Brett, you got to decipher that. Booty mate. What does that mean? Is that something inappropriate?
Beauty mate. No, it's beauty mate. This is good. You know, it's kind of the Aussie version of what Wendy was so generously said, right? It's yeah, thank you. You know, this was great, you know, and right. And I didn't pay my brother to say that.
That is your brother. Oh, right.
That is my brother. I love dearly, you know, and I miss dearly. And because I was going to go home this year, I was really looking forward to seeing my family, especially my brother. And of course, we probably won't get to do that. Maybe not till next year. So I'm glad I'm glad you joined, mate. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. And thank you again, Wendy, for the and everybody for the generous feedback. Sorry, I tend to kind of really get passionate about this. It's my home country, as we should do with all our own home countries. And thank you so much for everybody's feedback, and hope to be in touch soon. Please reach out if you've got any other questions.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you all for being on. I'm going to stop the recording at this point, and this concludes our webinar on crossing the culture gap to Australia. Stay tuned for more webinars coming up. Those of you who are following the Culture Mastery, you know there's one coming up with Sweden tomorrow. So Sweden, so be on that. But that means Aussies, you got to get up early. All right. Bye, everybody. Till the next time.